Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Originally, the prequel series was supposed to focus on the Skywalker saga, specifically the story of young Anakin Skywalker as he escapes from Tatooine, joins the Jedi Order, and then fights in the Clone Wars. But then the phenomenon of the clone troopers, originally a background element of the story, quickly rose in popularity, especially when the prequels ended and shows like the Clone Wars would really flesh out these characters. And in my opinion, eventually, the clone troopers would become just as popular as any of the main characters in the Skywalker saga, especially amongst my generation of fans. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that the clone troopers as characters are pretty pure. They don't have many flaws. These were individuals born into servitude, genetically designed to, for lack of better words, to be cannon fodder for the Chancellor's BS war against a controlled opposition. While the Jedi faltered and became corrupted and failed to protect the galaxy, the clones remained true to their original purpose and each other, and would valiantly serve the people of the Republic and the Empire afterwards, no matter how horrific the situation got. And while the clones would participate in heinous crimes of their own, it never seemed right to pin blame on them for their own actions because they had so little independence and autonomy. And in the limited moments when the clones were actually able to do what they wanted, they generally got things
this way.
right.
We are loyal soldiers. We follow orders, but we are not a bunch of unthinking droids. We are men. We must be trusted to make the right decisions, especially when the orders we are given are wrong. Fire! What happened? They're doing the right thing, Dogma. Because if this is how soldiers are rewarded for heroic actions, then one day, every man in this battalion may face a similar fate.
This all reinforces the fact that I believe the clones were pretty pure in both personality and spirit. A weird side effect of their kind being quarantined from ordinary society and all of the pitfalls that are usually associated with it, like greed, envy, pride. The clones seem to be resistant to not only fear and battlefield fatigue, but to many of the flaws that plagued humanity. Sure, there were bad and corrupt clones here and there, but they were pretty much the exception to the rule. By far, most of the clones seemed to be very well-adjusted and remarkable young men. And so in a twisted way, these enslaved, carbon-copied soldiers were the ideal role models for an entire generation of Star Wars fans to follow. They were definitely far less controversial and faultless than Anakin Skywalker, who in 3 short movies participated in a war as a child soldier, awkwardly forced himself onto Padme on several occasions, and then domestically abused her, and also slaughtered a bunch of defenseless children. Now, the Clone Wars TV show played a huge part in popularizing the clone trooper. We would be introduced to different units and different individual troopers and follow them through harrowing situations, usually while they're being led by their well-meaning but oftentimes flawed Jedi commanders. As the clones became more and more humanized and familiar to Star Wars fans also had to come to terms with the uncomfortable fact that these clones would kill all of the other good guys in this story, the Jedi. Now, since the prequel era, we've never really found out what truly happened to the clone troopers after Order 66. Bits and pieces of clues were handed down to us. The emergence of Captain Rex, Gregor, and Wolf and Rebels showed to us at least some of the clones were still alive and clearly free by the time of the Empire's rule. But what happened to everyone else? Were they really just all decommissioned and left to fade away? Or did something crazier happen? Was there a clone revolt like the one on Kamino in Legends? Or was there an even larger civil war, perhaps? With the release of shows like Andor, Kenobi, and the Jedi Fallen Order video game series, we get a better glimpse of the years between the Galactic Civil War and the Clone Wars. But again, we're not really given a clear answer of what happens. And I guess the in-universe reason for this is if there was a huge clone civil war, it's not something that the Empire would want people to know about, and it's probably something that they would try to isolate very quickly and get rid of. But I think with the release of the 2nd season of The Bad Batch, we're finally going to find out even more information about what really happened to the millions of clones who just seemed to conveniently be decommissioned just a few years after the Clone Wars ended. This part of the story never really made any sense to me. After all, the Empire had just inherited a war-torn galaxy from the Republic, and you need a lot of military force, or at least manpower, to be able to rebuild. Now, the core story of the Bad Batch so far has been focused on this mutated unit of clone commandos who, because of their mutations, have not really meshed well with the inhibitor chips, which has given them a level of autonomy that other clones simply don't get to enjoy. But in one of the more powerful episodes in the Bad Batch later on in the first season, which takes place on Ryloth, a clone captain named Hauser and 6 of his fellow clones basically side with the Twi'leks in their struggle for freedom. This is remarkable because these clones all still had their inhibitor chips installed inside of their brains and were somehow able to still fight off their obedience conditioning and fall back to their original programming, which is risking their lives to serve the people of this galaxy. This is the first incident, perhaps since the Battle of Umbar, in which we've seen clones actively disobey the orders of their commanding officer. It seems to suggest that while these inhibitor chips were successful at making the clones a bit more docile and obedient, it wasn't actually able to force the clones to do things against their own will, unless it was concerning the specific execution of the Jedi. I believe this means in the long term, despite all of the genetic manipulation and bio-augmentation that the Kaminoans and the Empire has done to the clones, the clone troopers would eventually all develop their own unique personalities and opinions on everything, including the state of the galaxy and politics. And I believe that as the Empire became more cruel and demanding of their soldiers, more troopers like Hauser and those 6 clones he was with would begin to object about their situation, especially the clones who were trained alongside the Jedi and would fight with them during the Clone Wars. The Jedi had their own flawed but generally moral, ethical codes which they passed down to their clone troopers, and this would definitely clash with their new orders from the Empire. And so I believe the clones weren't just decommissioned because they're extremely expensive to produce and maintain. I think it's also because there was this general fear from Palpatine that the clones would eventually awaken to their situation, because they are, after all, human beings. Finding an alternative to the elite clone trooper program during peacetime always made a lot of sense. You're not fighting another conventional army, so you don't really need high-quality troops in this situation. Replacing the clones with volunteer and conscripted TK troopers was a good cost-saving measure. But it's the part where the clones just disappeared overnight that never really made any sense to me. The clones were already paid for in full, and the Empire still had manpower issues, and so the clones were an ideal stopgap measure until the actual Stormtrooper program was fully finished and rolled out. Which leads me to believe that a clone revolt is not only possible, I think it's inevitable if you consider all the factors in place here. And in the second season of The Bad Batch, I believe we're going to begin to see signs of this emerge, especially if you consider some of the quotes we've seen in the recent trailer for the second season.
Rumors are more and more clones have been questioning the Order.
Then they are traitors, like the Jedi.
Yes, Commander Cody is back, and I think that's also another big deal. We'll discuss that in further detail later in the video, in another video, whatever. Let's focus more on this order that the clones are beginning to question. From what I can tell, this line is referring to either the decommissioning of the clone troopers or Order 66. Either way, it's really not good that the clones are questioning these orders. If it's about the decommissioning of the clone troopers, the situation is a bit simpler and easier to resolve, but it's still a huge problem for the Empire. There's an uncomfortable question about the clone army that has followed it around since its inception, and that's the question of what will be done with the clones who are no longer able to fight because of injury, disease, or eventually age. Even during the Republic era, there was really no real effort made to make sure that the clones could retire properly in comfort. This was very short-sighted, but then again, the war was going on, so I guess that's a reasonable excuse. But the clones at their core were still human beings capable of having wants and needs, and exhibiting outrage when treated unfairly. In the situation they were facing, the prospect of retirement from service was pretty unfair and could be very grim, especially if there was no groundwork placed to make sure that they could retire in relative comfort. And so if the clones begin to realize that their role in the Empire's future was limited, there could definitely be a lot of problems arising here. Questions about their future is something that they've never probably had to think about because everything is taken care of them by the Republic now begin to emerge. Whether it's post-US invasion Iraq or, post-warring period in China, one of the biggest internal threats a nation can face is a huge amount of unemployed soldiers who still have access to their weapons and training. And this is exactly the kind of situation the Empire faces with the clone troopers. The Empire would be smart to accommodate these clones, either by giving them things to do or creating a retirement program. The alternative, which is to do nothing, would be extremely costly and could lead to uprisings and even civil wars. It's just not the rational thing to do, but unfortunately, it seems like Tarkin and Admiral Rampart are in charge of the decommissioning of the clones, and these two individuals definitely are not rational actors. Tarkin and his acolytes prefer heavy-handed Sith-inspired punitive measures that are designed to scare people into submission. The problem is you can't really scare or intimidate a clone trooper. The only thing they're afraid of is probably not having a purpose. And once you begin to shake their belief in the chain of command by acting irrational, well, now you have a bunch of very disciplined, armed professionals who are going to see you as the enemy. Now, there is a second possibility that Cody is talking about Order 66 when he mentions that the clones are questioning orders. This would be an even larger problem than the clones being pissed off about being decommissioned, because this would basically make the clones question the very nature of the Empire and what Order 66 was about and why the clones carried out Order 66. I think further questioning and soul searching will lead to many clones fighting out about the chips, just like Fives, Rex, the Bad Batch. And that's because information like the inhibitor chips will spread like wildfire, even if it starts just as an unconfirmed rumor, because there'll be a lot of demand for answers here. If you think about it, for many of the clones, the Jedi commanders that they murdered were very much like mentor or even father or mother-like figures. Beneath the conditioning, there are real human emotions and connections between these clones and the friends they brutally murdered on that day. The artificial control the inhibitors exerted on the clones will wane after Order 66, and these real memories and experiences the clones had with their Jedi commanders will not fade away. And this will eventually make them question why they murdered their good friends. The clones will begin to question whether their Jedi leaders are actually loyal or not to the Republic. And even if they believe that the Jedi did try to overthrow the Chancellor illegally, surely the Jedi they personally knew was not a part of the plot or never said anything about that plot to them, and were just innocent victims caught in the whole entire situation. Eventually, the clones will come to a realization, however slow, that something was off about Order 66. Maybe they'll remember their own actions, their own behaviors, the complete lack of control they had when they pulled the trigger. The discovery of the inhibitor chips in their brains would lead to a fundamental betrayal of trust between the clones and their Imperial leaders, which again is extremely dangerous because the only thing that the clones really care about is the chain of command, and once trust in the chain of command is broken, well, you're gonna have a lot of problems. This is once again a sign of why the Empire's really unnecessary evil shenanigans always leads to many more problems than it fixes. The clone troopers were competent and efficient because of their humanity. I mean, these were sentient and thinking soldiers who were able to take a game plan, learn it, implement it on the run in the field, and make their own command decisions at the tactical level if necessary. The same qualities that make the clones efficient and flexible soldiers are going to make them very hard to brainwash and control using these inhibitor chips. The Empire's mentality, which is to control everything, led to constant struggle and conflict, a sign of poor leadership and inability to adapt to a changing situation. And as the years progress, more and more clones will begin to realize just how inept the Empire is and how cruel it will become in order to maintain control. Now, Commander Cody here is talking to a former Bad Batch member, Crosshair, whose personality and life experience has made him loyal to the Empire and its authoritarian ways naturally. Yes, this can happen as well. Clones could be more naturally aligned to the Empire as well, and Crosshair clearly is someone who doesn't need an inhibitor chip to follow the orders of Emperor Palpatine. From what we can tell, Crosshair and Cody are going to be working together with Admiral Rampart. Whether they'll be tasked with further prepping the TK troopers or hunting down the Bad Batch, we just don't know. But this will be an interesting situation because we know Crosshair is loyal, but what we don't know is whether Commander Cody is loyal to the Empire or more loyal to his own beliefs. I mean, up until this point, Commander Cody has definitely stayed loyal to the Empire. We see him in the prequels directly get contacted by Palpatine. In many ways, he is the prime clone that is associated with kicking off Order 66 when he blew up his former commander, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, the thing is, Cody actually doesn't know if he killed Kenobi or not, and he chooses not to send a squad out there to find Obi-Wan Kenobi. His body would have been pretty easy to retrieve. It fell into a lake. Dead bodies float, right? I mean, this was not very difficult to do. And so this is a really surprising oversight from one of the most meticulous and well-prepared clone commanders out there. We're going to save the discussion of whether Commander Cody actually purposely decided not to look for Kenobi's body after shooting him off of that wall, but he's definitely one of many candidates for being a woke clone, which is, I think, a phenomenon that, Disney should definitely take a closer look at because, again, it makes zero sense that there would be no clone troopers 5 years or even 10 years after the Empire basically takes over. Why waste all of these perfectly good soldiers unless there is a huge uprising, which is my belief here. Well, guys, let me know in the comment section below what you think about my theory. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Al, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy,